Hola, pues buenas tardes a todos.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We are in this wonderful after-lunch session, which can be tough sometimes, but I hope that the speakers will help to make it more agile. I would like to ask the people sitting at the bottom, don't feel shy. You can come closer to the speakers. You will see that they are real. They are not 3D printings. And we will start with this session. To me, this is a very interesting one, and we'll talk about standards and also about what ways of thinking we have about these standards. I understand that whoever starts with BIM from zero and starts dealing with BIM and sees so many acronyms, ICF, VDM, BEPs, there are so many acronyms. And many stakeholders are trying to reach a consensus so that we all go in the same direction regarding acronyms and other aspects. In this session, we have 3 speakers, very interesting, and I invite them to come to the stage. Please, Bernard and Brian. The first speaker, well, basically, we are going to have 3 presentations, as I said, about 20 minutes each, and we'll have some room for Q&A, maybe 10, 15 minutes, so that you can share your doubts or questions, and we can have a little bit of a debate here. The first speaker is Jordi Gonçalves, who actually opened this Congress this morning. He is a technical architect, a quantity surveyor. He also has a master's in construction businesses, and he has a very large experience working with construction companies. And at the same time, he is the president of the CATEP, and he's the vice president of business BIM Smart. We have seen that there are many initiatives in Catalonia, and he will talk about all these aspects regarding Catalonia. Well, hello again. This time I am going to talk about what the Construïm el Futur Commission, which would be the Building the Future Commission, is doing. We are trying to boost an implementation strategy in Catalonia. I'm the president of CATEP, but at the same time, we belong to the foundation ITEC, and we are also members of the Building the Future Commission. For this reason, we want to thank the ITEC leaders who are here with us because they have allowed me the opportunity to talk here today. First of all, we need to see how this all started, how the creation of the Building the Future Commission started. It actually began in the first European BIM Summit in February 2015. And it started with a manifesto BIMCAT Barcelona that I referred to this morning. We had some guidelines. It was a starting point, and it was the first manifesto in Spain regarding BIM. In this manifesto, we proposed some guidelines that were proposed by the Generalitat and also the Barcelona local government. And basically, these guidelines aimed to take into action the manifesto. So ITEC took the assignment to move on with the manifesto. The ITEC has way many more representatives from different agents and stakeholders from the construction sector in Catalonia. And in April 2015, we created the Building the Future Commission. The goal of this commission is to implement BIM, but it will also have other goals, because not everything is about BIM. We will also have other goals, although right now we are dealing with BIM specifically. The goal that we set back then was to have a document that identifies the whole set of necessary actions, the responsibilities needed to implement them, and the necessary process that will guide in an orderly and agreed manner from the different stakeholders towards implementation of BIM processes in the sector, and so that it can guide the decision-making process of a future BIM mandate. We see that it's quite a dense goal, but it's very meaningful. After that moment, more stakeholders took part in the commission. We have over 40 entities and also some people at the personal level that are part of these. We also have some professional associations, almost all the technical associations from Catalonia. We also have some council, national council. We also have the central government delegation that represents the Public Works Ministry, and we have different Catalan organizations. Pretty much all of them are represented here, representing the Catalan public administration and also the public companies that depend on public administration. Among all these public and private entities, we see that they have a working procedure that is basically having a lot of collaboration and participation between the different agents. For this reason, from the very first moment, ITEC actually proposed to have communication among the members using a platform in the cloud, and all the participants can have a clear vision of each stage all the time. How do we organize ourselves? Well, you can see it here. We have a plenary assembly at the very top level, where we have representatives from all the organizations in the list in the slide before. However, the core is the GT0, the Task Force 0, that deals with coordination efforts. ITEC is represented here, the CATEP is also represented here, and we have three specialists that also take part of this task force. They have a technical profile and very large knowledge regarding BIM. We have Victor Roch, who is here with us today, L.A. Coloma. I haven't seen him, I'm not sure if he's here. He is? Okay. Or being represented. Oh, he is here. Okay, I don't see him, but it's fine. And Ignacy Perez, who is also here. He's here also in 3D, as you have seen. So this coordinating group basically has three task force depending on them: regulations and technology, processes and technology. Those are the three sub groups that depend on the coordination group. The first one depends on the ITEC, then the CATEP leads the second, and Mr. Coloma leads the third one. The path to the transition towards BIM basically follows an itinerary that aimed to establish some actions and also some planning. Then we would have a study of the implementation stage. We would set goals, schedule, resources, and then the next step could be the action implementation of the actions that were defined in the previous stages. For this reason, in 2015 and in part of 2015 and 2016, there were 27 meetings of Task Force 1, 2, and 3, and then we had 15 meetings of the coordination group, the coordination task force. In 2016 and 2017 so far, we've had 9 meetings of the task forces, and we had 4 meetings of the coordinating task force. According to our planning, we will celebrate many more meetings between 2017 and 2020. And how do we want to define and analyze all these actions that will be implemented? Victor Roch actually provided us with a roadmap based in the Canadian roadmap. Many things have been invented already, but we have so many choices available that this roadmap was a great finding for us, this Canadian roadmap. In this roadmap, some axes were defined. In this case, there were 8. We can see 7 on screen. And then we have the 8th one, which is cross-cutting. And basically, this axis, these elements, wanted to find some starting points and also wanted to set some finish points. Once this was done, we needed to define the actions and the timing that we needed to define from the starting point to the finish point. In all these starting points, as I said, there are 8 in total. The first one is to align. This is very small on screen. I'm sure you cannot read it, but if you're interested, all our paperwork from the European BIM Summit will be available in a Congress book that will contain all the presentations, and I'm sure you will be able to read there way better. So if you are taking pictures, I know that you won't be able to read it because it's too small, but it will be available afterwards. Also, we are thinking of putting this up on the website so that everyone can access this information. As I was saying, the first axis is to align, and that means to promote the commitment of public institutions, the sector stakeholders, and the academia in promoting BIM in an orderly manner. This is what we understood by aligning. And where did we want to go? The desirable scenario here was to have wide support from the industry with total commitment from the public sector, the professional sector, and the academia. That means that we were including everyone. And we also wanted to create a wide demand from clients. This may seem a typical goal, or maybe quite ambitious, but that's the goal we need to move towards to. The second goal, or the second axis, is to accompany. We want to create and give recommendations to create models, protocols, and also technical instructions to facilitate and standardize the use of BIM. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We want to accompany everyone who basically need to live working with BIM. And our desirable scenario is using some compatible software with open formats to exchange information. We want to have a rigorous standard certification, and we want to define the data exchange and protocols. That's also quite an ambitious goal. The third axis is to educate. I think it's pretty self-explanatory as well, but we need to define the training needs in the different curricula so that we can design the training programs that will allow to adopt basic competencies in BIM environments for the students. If we don't do this, if we don't define the needs we have, what will happen? Well, training will be done in different ways with different goals. Therefore, our commission Building the Future is aiming to focus and also show a reference point for everyone. For this reason, the desirable scenario is to have some training and education programs that are integrated at all educational and professional levels. It needs to be a reference for everyone who has finished the studies and the ones that are still doing it. The fourth axis is to facilitate, to define and implement collaborative projects environments that will facilitate the adoption of BIM. At the beginning, we didn't really talk that much about collaborative project environments. Actually, I remember that on the second meeting of SBIM, Ferran Bermejo actually highlighted, and many people were surprised by this, but he highlighted that we needed to focus on this collaborative perspective. Ferran Bermejo actually reflected on this in our meeting, and it is clear that we need to make efforts to facilitate so that all the participating stakeholders don't forget about this collaborative project environment. The desirable scenario is to have some collaborative work models so that their implementation is the most usual thing in the sector, in the activity in this sector. Therefore, it is clear that we aim for high goals. Also, the next one is to assess or evaluate. We want to establish and apply indicators that will allow to assess the level of maturity in applying BIM and also the impact it will have in public administrations, the sector stakeholders, and the academia. We need to measure the evolution. Therefore, the desirable scenario is to have a continuous assessment of the majority of the community, supporting the self-assessment and also the comparative assessment. The sixth axis is continuous improvement. We want to establish the follow-up mechanisms of the transition in applying the BIM environments in order to facilitate the adoption and implementation of the needed improvement measures. The desirable scenario is to have the sector stakeholders willing to apply continuous improvement as a tool to achieve their efficiency, both at an individual and collective level. The next axis is to be a driving force in order to boost and promote having pilot projects in collaborative environments that use the BIM methodology. And they will need to be outreached based on the learned lessons in the sector. We want to have some examples of pilot cases, and basically in a collaborative environment that's really, really needed. We want to have the desirable scenario of having a set of experiences that will show the best practices to the different stakeholders. The eighth axis is a cross-cutting axis. We want to harmonize. We need to pay attention to the best practices and initiatives at a local, national, and global level in order to share and harmonize processes and results. It does not have number 8 on it, but this is a key axis. So far in our summit, we've had different people, different speakers that have brought a lot of information and knowledge. However, if we only focus on in Catalonia and Spain, we'll see that this is something we are working on. And some may wonder, SBIM does some things and then the people working in Catalonia do something different. No, we work in a parallel manner. We are always in touch. We know what's going on in SBIM and in the Catalonia agents. And this is a cross-cutting axis, trying to unify, trying to make homogeneous everything, and also making information available for all the parts that participate. And this is very important because we need to move forward together together with other committees that are also working in this direction. Maybe they are doing it in a different way, but with the same goal in mind. Therefore, in order to achieve and complete this process and define all the actions that we need to undertake, departing from these starting points in order to get to the finish points, we see that the different task forces 1, 2, and 3 have been meeting, and they actually were able to propose more than 500 actions. It was an enormous amount of work. The ITEC did a lot of work here, and we reached the conclusion that there were 88 actions that actually summed up the more than 500 proposed actions. These actions have been defined. There were many personal surveys. I actually referred to this morning, not me, but Mr. Rule. He actually mentioned this, that all the members of the Building the Future Commission answered to a survey, and after we got all the results, we got some information about costs, about timing, and about priorities. We wanted to hear the voice of all the agents in this sector, and we wanted to know their opinion regarding all these aspects I mentioned, because they are very important to be clear before we start moving on. So after we got all the information from the surveys, we were able to make some agreements. We performed also some studios. We found tools. We also were able to promote outreach, to create debate forums, and we were also to get some pilot examples. These 88 actions have been planned, and we can sort them out by topic and different aspects. The result, if we look at it from a starting point perspective, we need to remember now. I'm trying to find it. Okay. So if we go from the starting point to the finish point, we will get to the last slide that we saw. Actually, here. Right there, it's where we find the 88 actions divided by terms, or semesters, rather. This is what the ITEC actually presented in the last assembly, where all the members of this commission attended. And I think that was very relevant. The members of the commission decided to bring their own funds in order to finance the first steps of the development of these actions. They didn't want to wait for public administrations to undertake this task. This is quite interesting, and I think it's worth it to highlight, because they thought, well, if someone else does not do that for us, we'll do it ourselves. So basically we see that we had the starting point and the finish point, and in between we have all these planned actions. Right now we find ourselves here, and then we are entering the second stage, answering how, when, and how much in order to implement the actions. I think I'm out of time. Sorry about it. And I think that's it. We actually got the agreement from the plenary assembly, who in March last year decided to move one step further and so that the members of the Commission would finance the first steps. There are 40 of us. We are welcome to have more people joining. And at the same time, as Ferran Falcó explained this morning, we have the Interdepartamental Commission of the Catalan government. They actually ask ITEC to draft the white paper to implement BIM in the public administration in Catalonia, and which will also include the guidelines for this implementation. I also would like to remind that BIM is just a part of these three pillars, IPD and Lean. I think that ITEC is actually one of the big supporters, and we have actually carried out many actions for the outreach of IPD, BIM and Lean as well. Thank you very much, and that's it on my side. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Jordi.
Well, thank you very much, Jordi. Actually, the work carried out by the committee, it's been really interesting and excellent. And the members of this committee, they have shown the willingness to fund the first steps. And that's because we are interested parties in this. Well, our next speakers will be Bernard Ferris. He's French, but he's going to do his presentation in Spanish. His Spanish is better than my French anyway. And he comes from Toulouse. He's a member of the French-speaking chapter of Building Smart and media constructor as well. And he is a member of the PPBIM, the commission in AF Nord, which is the standardization body in France. And he's going to talk about the current standpoint of BIM in France. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I will try to present you and explain what we are doing in France regarding standards. I've been member of Media Construct for a long time, which represents the French-speaking chapter of Building Smart International. And for some years, I've been the technical coordinator there for the French-speaking chapter. I'm a member of the one commission at AFNOR. AFNOR is the French body that defines standards. And from the last 2-3 years, we've got this commission, the PPBIM, which means actually products properties for BIM. That was the first work carried out by this commission, and a method was defined in order to choose those properties that define BIM products. Now this commission is participating also at a European level in the works of the standard 442. I also teach at an architecture school and try to teach BIM to future architecture, and also for actual professionals, because there's been some people are already working on the market, but they are eager to know what BIM is about, and BIM was not taught back then when they were studying at the university. I work in real projects. Currently, the city of Toulouse started a project about a year ago with different schools. There are 6 projects right now in Toulouse applying BIM to schools. Some people may think that BIM is mandatory in France, but it's not. Maybe people think this because of the statement of the former minister in France who said that it was going to be mandatory in 2017. And she said that 1 week before she resigned, actually. Then there's a project or a report that was completed in December 2014, authored by Bertrand Delcambre. And in this document, this document is actually the roadmap of the work done in the last 3 years. It was funded by the Ministry of Housing in France. And the majority of documents that I'm going to include in my presentation are available online, except for one in French. The ministry, the housing ministry in France, has invested 20 million euros to develop this. Well, what you can see here is the professional organizations and their representation. I would say that all professional profiles have their representatives in this plan, in this transition plan. This plan has 3 different axes. The first one is to encourage and to motivate people to use BIM. The second axis would be, or the second pillar would be to improve the competencies and skills in companies, architects, constructors, whatever it is. And finally, to install more trust. And to do that, we need standards. Well, a few outputs from this program or plan. The first one, guidelines for clients. This is very important because when a client wants BIM, doesn't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So it's very important to provide the client with guides, also guidelines for the BIM exploitation plan. Then we have a series of documents, for instance, one regarding legal matters. Then we have the first draft of a dictionary of properties regarding BIM objects. Then we follow up some projects to see, actually to define best practices and identify them. Then we have actions in order to make an inventory of applications, software applications, formulation applications. We are going, and also training, we are going to launch also a collaborative platform, which is going to be free for small companies. And finally, is the standardization roadmap. That is the path we have to follow towards standardization. So in April, there was the strategy, the French strategy for the pre-normalization actions and the normalization of BIM in building was launched last month. And we created this document so that the people, the representatives that actually speak on behalf of France and in different areas have some kind of guidelines, because it's difficult sometimes, and we want this to have an outreach at the national, European and international level. And we want to reach out to standardization bodies such as the ISO, CIN, and so on, and to work together with industry actors such as the Geospatial Consortium and the Building Smart International. This picture, this drawing, summarizes the way or the content of the roadmap I just mentioned. Is the concept of a house with different floors. We begin from the third floor, which is the process floor. We are interested in the stakeholders and how they work. And the first topic, that first technical topic here, is the information delivery manual. This lays out rules and standards to define and describe processes and the information required. The second floor would be about data. And there we approach the famous standards, the IFC. Then BIM. BIM must be an open format and also available to the public. Then initiatives to exchange comments on a specific model. Then we move on to the first floor, which relates to terminology. The first thing we need is a work on dictionaries. It's important, you have seen that already, and for many years we have set the goal to create a multi-language international dictionary. I know it's hard, but it's definitely really important, because the IFC is not enough. We have to agree in the sense of each term and word. We also need classifications. In France, classifications are not widely spread. Omniclass or other tools may be used in other countries for classification purposes, but not in France. We need to pick some classifications, and now currently there's a working group which is analyzing this different set of classifications to pick one, or at least to adapt one of the existing classifications. Finally, the model view definition. This is a methodology to define a set or the whole, or a model as a whole, and that would be it. Then we have cross-cutting topics such as BIM objects, different solutions that we call data containers. Then we have to bear in mind that a project, that when approaching a project, we have to think about the whole life cycle. The topic number 10 is linked data from the web. This is very interesting in order to exchange information between BIM and geographical information. Then number 11, the BIM execution plan. Number 12, it's about a standard, an ISO, a standard in English. And finally, the city GML. That would be the standard applied to cities, such as the IFC to BIM, then the GML is the standard for cities and municipalities. City GML is also a data model. That complements IFCs. In this plan, there are the results of a survey carried out at the end of 2016. And according to this survey, 35% of professionals that responded to the survey had already begun to use BIM. And about 50% of these, of architects and engineers, with an increase by 13% compared to the results of a previous study, consider that. And 20% of the contractors also used BIM, but that's a problem that we have to solve in Toulouse. Currently, we are discussing with different companies and organizations so that more and more companies participate in this kind of projects, both SMEs and large companies. Finally, 26% of the clients started to ask for BIM in some of their projects, but only 12% of them ask for 3D models for more, or ask for 3D models for more than 50% of their projects. 80% of the professionals consider that their knowledge on the models and BIM methods are not enough, and half of them state that they are going to do any or some kind of training in the short term. So that will be my last slide. These are the expectations from the authorities. The top 3 priorities would be to encourage and embrace the standards adoption. In the second place, to further support BIM training, and finally, financial support. So, thank you very much.
Pues muchas gracias, Bernard, porque
Thank you very much, Bernard, because there's no doubt that the sector in France is very similar to the sector in Spain in the way it is shaped, and I think we can share many experiences and learn from each other. The third speaker in this session is Brian Skripak. He's the Vice President of Canon Design. I'm not sure if you've ever seen a tender where in the specification document states the architect technique model needs to comply with the LOD 300 and so on. What is that? Well, here we have Brian Skripak who will tell us what this is about that we're asked to do in many tenders. Brian, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to give you a little more insight about my background and the LOD topic is one really where, as Sergio just mentioned, I'm on the authoring committee for the LOD specification with the BIM Forum, and I'm also an active member in the AIA Technology and Architectural Practice Knowledge community that is a strong collaborator with the BIM Forum group. So those are 2 activities outside of the day job that you saw on the first slide that I actively participate in. How many people in the audience have seen Marzia Bolpani's Many Faces of LOD blog post? Only a couple. This was actually released last year in the summer of 2016. This is a fantastic blog post that it really goes back and traces the organization of LOD, which he uses kind of as a start point, as you see up on the screen, as one of LOX. LOD has multiple variations, multiple definitions. We use level of development in the United States. If you're in the UK, refer to it as level of detail. But specifically tracking those starts and the way that we deal with it in the US is really one that focused on Vico Software back in 2014, was really an originator in this idea of LOD. In 2008, the AIA took that idea and started to apply more formal definitions. Those became part of our digital practice documents. These were exhibits to our owner-architect agreements, owner-consultant agreements, and started to set a foundation for what we're going to deliver as part of our BIM. Ultimately, in 2013, the BIM Forum came along. BIM Forum's part of the Association of General Contractors of America, and they teamed up to actually author and further evolve those definitions, which has now really become a key standard in the United States. So those key collaborators are, in fact, the American Institute of Architects, the AIA, and BIM Forum, which is part of the AGC of America, or the Association of General Contractors. We've been fortunate enough that as we've gained a lot of traction with this deliverable specification, that we've been able to pick up more organizations, as you start to see at the bottom of the screen, that are really becoming contributors. And along the way, since 2013, we've been able to progress and evolve this document to have an annual release cycle. So all the way up to 2016, which is the current version that's out and available. So if you go to the BIM Forum website and search for LOD, that's what you'll get. Actually, later this summer, the 2017 version will be out for draft and public comment, which anybody can provide feedback on. Our core group will get that information, and then we'll republish the 2017 version of the document in November at our fall event. The big thing that's different about the specification is we're really not looking at BIM as a tool, a technology, a process. We're focused on a building information model as a deliverable. And what is that comprised of, and how do we utilize it and share that information with our project teams? Both the images up on the screen are examples of building information models. First one's going to allow you to do very early conceptual estimating, site orientation, get some sustainability feedback to it. That cost estimating is really at an overall cost per square foot, how many floors, big round numbers that you're starting to get. I would suggest that that model has LOD 100 elements for walls, floors, and roofs, and that's really about it. That's about all the information that you can get out of it. That's great, but we want to make sure that there's not an expectation that you're never going to be able to do clash detection. You're never going to be able to do shop or fabrication models, just like the image on the right isn't going to be capable of giving you those large, big picture schematic ideas. We understood that there needed to be a way to define the differences and level set those expectations so everybody in the industry knew what we were talking about when we referred to level of development. So in the release of that document, these are actually major components that really define what level of development is in the United States. And the BIM Forum really set out to describe that as a way to articulate with a high degree of clarity the content and reliability of the BIMs that we're creating. And that was something that needed to be done over the course of the life cycle of the project. One of the big things that we talk about is there's no such thing as an LOD 100, 200, or 300 model. This isn't an inclusive description when we say LOD. It's about model elements, assemblies, and components. We're defining the wall, the floor, the roof, the door, the window, not the entire facility. And those level of developments are definitions. It's like looking something up in a dictionary. It's not a prescribed standard. We're not telling the design or construction community at the end of construction documents to be perfect, your models and model elements must meet these certain expectations. So in the graphic that you see at the bottom, it starts to show that different model elements will evolve at different stages throughout the life cycle of the building. We don't prescribe who's responsible for that. That's something that the team would do in a BIM execution plan. And we really set the stage that these LOD definitions are minimal. This is the minimum benchmark to meet a certain criteria, and they're cumulative and they build upon one another. And they don't address two-dimensional information. This is a BIM level of development specification, so that makes all the sense in the world. And it's really about how we're communicating. there's information that we as an architect or engineer know about the information that we're documenting that the recipient, maybe the contractor, maybe one of our other consultants, will not necessarily know. Might be unintended information that isn't useful or reliable. So if we see the sketch on the left, it's just a door. All we know is there's a doorway going into a building, going into a room on the left-hand side. We don't know the size, we don't know the height, we don't really know where it's located. It's just schematic. If we look at a CAD drawing or a two-dimensional output, now we're starting to benchmark where something is. We can put a dimension down and say this is where it's located. We can put a door number down so we can go to the specification of the door schedule and find very specific information out. In a building information model, we might simply put a door in. Where is it located? We could get these strange, inconsistent dimensions. We may have just grabbed a door quickly out of our list and put it in as a placeholder. Because it looks good in plan, that was the output. But if somebody selects it, they may interpret what door type it is, what door material it is, what finishes are on it differently than what we intended as the designer. And that's something that we want to be able to control by using this LOD communication. We're not talking about detail and how much granularity is put into a model object or what it looks like. We're talking about development and how reliable it is. How reliable is that output? How well has it been thought through? What can it be utilized for? Those are the big ideas that we're looking at when we talk about development. And we have 6 key points of evolution for this conversation, 100 through 500. First one really talks about being able to put something in that's a symbol or a generic representation. Very much like that building block model we saw, it's really at 100. There's some ideas of floors and walls. It's really all we know about it, but it doesn't yet get to the point of being a generic system or meeting the expectations of a 200 definition. Here we can start to identify building components from one another, and we start to have approximate size, shapes, and quantities. Those may change, they may move, they're going to evolve through the design process, but that's where they're at right now. We want people to know that's what they can be relied upon for. At 300, they become specific assemblies. They can be dimensioned from, they can be queried in the model and trusted and relied upon at that stage. Once we get to 350, we start to look at this idea of a model that also includes interferences with other building systems. So a piece of mechanical ductwork at 300 may just be a rectangle, but by the time we get to 350, we start to see insulation and hangers. Those are the things that take up space. Typically call these elements trade coordination model elements at 350. As we evolve it to 400, we start to see fabrication and shop drawing ready information, a shop drawing model that we start to have at 400. And then at 500, it really talks about at the end of the project, what are we doing to field verify that information that's currently in place in our models. It's also important that this LOD document, just like we started to hear about in the last couple of presentations, is focused on a classification structure. For us, the BIM Forum is reliant on using the uniformat classifications, which is a standard developed by CSI in the United States, the Construction Specification Institute, as well as the Construction Specifications of Canada, CSC. So these are two, the major organization that we use in North America. They categorize things from level 1 to 5. So on the left of the screen, you see the major level 1 categories, and then how we incrementally dig down into those and become more defined from level 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is a great way to have some consistency in the documents and be organized about what we're doing to work. And the image on the screen is actually a level, this goes down to level 5, C1010.10.20 is the uniformat classification for a interior fixed partition that is made of metal studs. So as we get from up to level 200, we see maybe a skinny wall for an interior wall and a thick wall for exterior. But by the time we get to 300, we know that there's gypsum wallboard, a layer of metal stud, and another layer of gypsum wallboard. So now we understand all the layers of that. When we get to 350, we start to see the kickers and the major structural components. And then at 400, we know we can fabricate that and know how we can assemble those elements. Much the same when we deal with a structural element, we just know that there's physically something there that's holding up the building. By the time we get to 200, we know if it's a concrete shape, we know if it's a steel shape. 300, we know it's a W10 by whatever, and then we start to build in the fabrication level details as we progress from 350 all the way up to 400. Model elements can really be put together at different stages like you're seeing on the screen. Again, it's not a LOD 300 model. There's 300 components, 200 components, 100 components. In instances where you might collaborate, like the image on the screen, you start to see where a trade partner might come in to actually detail out the curtain wall. And at the construction document phase, while the envelope condition might be at 300 for those exterior wall assemblies, that unique element has evolved beyond it up to 350, so we can get that detailed information to go out to bid. When we talk about the LOD specification, we're not just looking at geometry either. This document has evolved. 2013, that's all there was geometry, but now we're also including data, and we have the model element table, which has associated attribute information. This is a long list that is, again, is organized by building systems based on that uniformat classification. And what it does is it gives us the opportunity to look from that master segment and find what we call attribute tables, which we'll talk about in a second. Those attribute tables show all the possible data elements that can be built in to those individual components or assemblies. What we want to be able to do is use this as a worksheet to document when that information is going to be applicable to our project, as far as project delivery milestones, or where it may be applicable to a specific BIM use case. In this case on the screen, you're seeing estimating and lead or sustainability calculations that you might be looking to track. Those baseline attributes take us here. All of the possible data points that we may want to capture about one of those individual elements is listed out here. At the top of the screen, we have the baseline, which really considers these are the minimum criteria that you need in that element. We start to see what data type it is as we move across the screen. So we have data types, we have units, and then we also have what the different variables are that you could potentially put in the commentary section. So we move across, we say at what level of development does this become important, and what are its use cases on the end. So now we've created this holistic environment for both data and geometry about the building information models that we're creating. This gives us a high level of reliability to share that information and say, this is what's in the model, this is what's been figured out, this is how you can use it as we start to partner and share that information. While the LOD specification is not specifically a standard or it's a specification, it's a guide, it's a dictionary for that information. The US market and the AIA have started to evolve to have additional contract language that can be utilized. Whether it's our owner-architect agreement or an owner-consultant agreement, we're able to attach what's now called the AIA E203, which is a BIM and digital data protocol exhibit. That really is, as it states on the slide, an executive summary that references how digital data, which is a very inclusive topic all the way down to emails and contracts, shop drawings, but also how BIM can be used and relied upon in the model. There's a specific protocol form, which is the AG202 document that allows us to complete a model element table, much like we saw on the screen, and also reference out to a BIM execution plan so we can further detail out how the project team is going to use the BIM throughout the course of the project. So what you're seeing now is the AIA G202 from 2013, and the image on the right is actually that model element table. So again, you see that uniformat structure. You can define at what LOD that model element will evolve to at that milestone, who the element author is, and what notes you may have about it. And those notes might be additional inclusions or exclusions from those minimum baseline standards that we've outlined in the document. As we move forward into 2017, I said we'll be able to download this here early this summer. There have been a whole series of new sections. Interesting that a lot of the conversations today already focused around civil and infrastructure. One of the new areas that we started to document was this idea of civil highways and bridges. So that's a new expansion that we'll start to see in that document. A lot of other structural elements have been added recently as well. But back on that idea of classifications, while uniformat's great to track assemblies of building elements, we also found it important to relate that to other standards. So being able to use OmniClass. So now every classification section has a mapping number back to OmniClass, as well as the associated master format sections that are utilized in a traditional specification in the States. We also talked about standardizing and organizing data types. How are we going to categorize whole numbers, decimal numbers, deal with true-false statements, dates, different levels of information? Let's be consistent about how we approach that and standardize it for our documents. was also important for us to deal with rooms. We spent so much time dealing with the geometry that bounds the space. How are we actually dealing with that spatial asset that's inside of it? That has a life cycle all the way from the initial planning and programming and room data sheets all the way down to turnover for an owner to track those as spatial assets in the building. So we wanted to make sure that we were including that as part of the LOD specification as well. Grids and origins and start points. We all know that we have multiple models that we're trying to pull together. How can we speak a common language about where the insertion point is, how we track that from a model-to-model comparison, how we engage models versus laser scans, and how we start to use different systems for tracking the location of elements and shooting those coordination points out on the job site. We need to have a common language that we're using at a macro and a micro scale out on the job site. And lastly, one of the things that BIM Forum has done in collaboration with CMBIM is actually providing sample models that highlight how these LODs evolve throughout a project. And what's available right now for free for anybody to download at the link above. Again, if you just go to cdbim.com, you'll actually see this at the bottom of the screen where you can download these models. What we're actually seeing is throughout different schematic design, DD, and multiple stages for CD, providing individual models that show how elements have evolved at certain stages and being able to color code them and dissect them. These are actually downloaded in either, they're an RVT file right now. They're going to evolve to be usable as an IFC file that you can download, and they have data points in them as well as the attribute tables that are there. So now you can start to see practical examples of what is in place. The only thing that's there right now is structure. We're continuing to build this out, so there'll be much more information that's attached to these in the very near future. So in closing, one of the things we want to remember that when we talk about LOD, level of development, it's a language, it's a communication tool. That specification is actually a dictionary that defines those minimum requirements about how we share information. It's not about the entire model, it's about the individual systems that are in place, and it's really focused on setting an expectation for the reliability and use of those model elements by the continued design team, the build team, and ultimately the owner once they receive this at the end of the project. So one last image there just to show you the link of where you can download that. But again, if you type BIM Forum LOD specification, you'll be able to get the 16 version, and 17 will be coming out shortly for a public comment, which would be great to get everybody's feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. La verdad es que tenemos 3 minutos.
Well, thank you very much. We have 3 minutes until the coffee break, so I think we have time to take one question. I don't know if the audience has a question regarding this commission, Building the Future in Catalonia, or the implementation of BIM in France, or the LOD presented by our colleague. Come on, people. Because otherwise I have to raise a question. Okay, then a question for Brian. Let's begin with Brian. I don't know if BIM Forum has thought about making the BIM LODs to have a greater outreach, because I don't know if they are working in the harmonization of the LODs systems and what BIM Forum is doing every year, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because there's so many of us working in parallel.
Doing now is BIM Forum. One of the new things that occurred recently was that we're now the U.S. chapter of Building Smart International, and we have some of our leadership team on the BIM Forum that also crosses over with Building Smart. So I think that'll start to bring a lot more collaboration and communication with other countries in Europe and elsewhere around the world. We started this in 2013, and it's probably really even 2011 that we started before we published the first one. So I think a lot of groups were just trying to evolve that idea. So once we kind of got those standard definitions, we've actually had some conversations in recent meetings that we say it's an act of Congress to change those baseline definitions. So knowing that's the direction we're going and wanting to continue to evolve that, I think is a core goal, but we certainly want to be able to collaborate and share and pull in other organizational standards, like some of the work that was talked about before with the Building Smart International. And that's where we've gotten things about spaces and rooms and grid organizations. There's things that we haven't evolved yet that we know are out there in the industry. They're really trying to define and bring those back into the group and help use those to guide our way.
Pues yo creo que Bernard, por lo menos en España...
Well, Bernard, I don't know how is it in France, but in Spain we are kind of waiting to develop certain standards to make something different from what the committee establishes, right? I don't know what are you doing it in France, if you are working in parallel or if you are waiting for the Commission. Bien, regarding the LOD, we are working on that from Media Construct, but also together with the European Commission. And I think that the best way to, or the best level for collaboration is at the European level. For in the works that I present, yes, because Jordi was saying to be more cross-cutting and to harmonize, to be aware of what's the evolution in the market, and when consensus is reached, then to adopt new paths that may lead to different outcomes. Yes, the delay of the incorporation of Spain into this methodology has brought us the advantage of watching what others have done and make the most of them, right? We should actually reduce the times and to benefit from the experiences of our neighbors and colleagues. Yes. I don't know if it was Marc Marquez or Dani Pedrosa in MotoGP. Well, he was going from the last position, but actually working hard, he won actually that race. So being the last one on the road doesn't mean you are going to lose, but of course you have to participate, you have to contribute with resources. And I think that's a clear statement, right? I don't know if the audience has any further comments. Otherwise, we have a coffee break.